Prometheus, with his axe, had slashed open the skull of Zeus, and Prometheus slices through it with an axe, which, by the way, is a symbol of cutting through fatalism. And Prometheus delivers Athena from out of the skull of Zeus. And who is she? She's the goddess of wisdom and war. The forgetfulness of Epimetheus, which is the flip side of the Promethea of Prometheus, winds up being responsible for the fact that man lacks an essence. And therefore, Prometheus enlists the aid of Athena. Prometheus is molding mankind. Athena puts a butterfly into the mind, usually it's into the head of humanity. The butterfly is the ultimate symbol of metamorphosis and transformation.
Wow.
So it's underlining the fact that there is no human nature. The point is, Prometheus brought the gift of techne to man so that we could determine our own destiny. Right now, we are at the 11th hour. We're at a key turning point in the face of the technological singularity. Prometheus is a figure that represents the promise of technological science. It's more important than ever right now to positively reappropriate this myth and understand the power that it already has over us unconsciously. We need to take that unconscious power, that daimonic power of the Prometheus archetype over our society, and transform it into something that's more self-conscious and that can be directed in a positive manner. Ha-Shaitan means the adversary.
Sure.
And so is he the adversary? Hell yeah, he's the adversary. Prometheus is the original adversary.
Welcome back to the Gnostic Informant, and you are about to attain true gnosis. And today, returning is one of the highly demanded scholars, Dr. Jason Reza Jorjani, author of Prometheism, Lovers of Sophia, Iranian Leviathan, Prometheus and Atlas, and a ton more books. But today, we get the pleasure of talking about Prometheus, one of the more fascinating characters in mythology. Who is he? What is his story? We have fragments. We have different writers like Aeschylus who talks about some of the stuff that happens in his myth. But let's put it all together in one spot. So, Dr. Jorjani, first of all, welcome to Gnostic Informant again. I'm glad to have you back on. Let's talk about Prometheus and what exactly is, if we put together his myth into one coherent story, what is it?
So, Neil, first of all, great to be back on. Always a pleasure. The thing about the myth of Prometheus is that it isn't nearly as widely known as it ought to be, to the point where you have to wonder, and after all, this is a Gnostic-oriented program, you have to wonder whether there hasn't been some kind of archontic suppression. Because, you know, many Greek myths are the subject of countless children's books and film adaptations, right? Even Hollywood films and so on and so forth. But here we're dealing with a myth that spans from the War of the Gods and the Titans to the creation of mankind, to the great flood that destroyed a worldwide human civilization, right? I mean, the myth of Prometheus is unparalleled in terms of its monumental scope, addressing all of the key turning points of, you know, the creation, evolution, and potential past destruction of mankind. So why is this myth as obscure as it is? I think it's because the essence of this myth is a call to rebellion and self-determination that's extremely threatening to any reigning establishment. And so in the classical world, this myth was already being suppressed because it was a threat to, you know, the Olympian world order of that time. And then as this myth transformed, and we'll discuss this, into a Luciferian form after the advent of Christianity, particularly, you know, from the Middle Ages through the Renaissance into the early modern period, when Prometheus is rediscovered and reappropriated by particularly romantic authors like Byron and Shelley and Goethe and so forth. Prometheus yet again became a symbol of insurrection and human self-determination that was threatening both to the church and to the state. And so this is why I think that, it's been rendered far more obscure than it ought to be. And so let's unpack, the core symbols and main twists and turns of this very powerful, I was about to say epic, but really what it is a tragedy. And in fact, as we'll get into it, Prometheus is the first known tragedy in the recorded history of human literature.
Wow. That's fascinating.
So where should we start? Should we start maybe with the sources? Just a review of...
Yeah, because I know you got in Hesiod, you have a lot of Prometheus stuff happening with, you mentioned Deucalion and the flood. Prometheus sort of plays this role. And I almost wonder if there's an older Proto-Indo-European myth that predates the Sumerians and this myth, because he looks like he's playing the same role Enki's playing in Sumeria, where he tells, Enki tells Gilgamesh or whoever, hey, build a flood because Anu's going to flood everybody out. But in the Hesiod myth, he's like, it's just Zeus doing that. It's the same thing. And then you have Aeschylus, but I'm jumping ahead now. But yeah, let's get to the sources, sure.
So there most certainly is both an Indo-European predecessor or prototype for this myth, and also a Sumerian one. And actually, since you went there, let me just run with that.
Sure. That
basically the myth of Prometheus in its Greek form appears to be a synthesis of the myth of Enki with the story of a figure called Amirani. And so let me start with the lesser known one. Amirani is a fire-bringing titan that was worshipped by the Scythian branch of the Iranian peoples who lived in the Caucasus. Now, of course, if anyone knows even the littlest bit about the myth of Prometheus, they know that Prometheus was bound in the Caucasus by Zeus. This is where, it's the site where he's punished, tortured for having been the benefactor of mankind. So in the Caucasus Mountains, there was actually this cult of Amirani. And you had these Scythians worshiping a titan who waged war against the gods and who brought fire to mankind and taught humans metallurgy, including how to forge weapons. And you often see imagery of Amirani in particularly what's present-day Georgia, which used to be, a Scythian Iranian territory. And in fact, the last remnant of the Scythian people, the Ossetians, still live in Georgia today. Wow. And so in that area of Georgia and Ossetia, this, stronghold of the Iranians in the Caucasus, you see this imagery of Amirani holding a torch in one hand and a sword in the other, symbolizing the fact that this fire that he stole from the heavens and brought to humanity was used as the fire of the forge, including in order to empower humanity to basically declare its independence from tyrannical and unjust gods. So this Amirani figure also winds up being chained and attacked by the eagle of the tyrannical lord that he leads humanity in a rebellion against. Wow. And we'll come to this later as part of, the various episodes in the myth of Prometheus. But ultimately, Hercules, or the Greek Heracles, frees Prometheus from, his torture, being chained to this rock. And he does so by shooting the eagle of Zeus through with arrows. And this is part of the Amirani myth, that there is this figure who the Greeks called the Scythian Hercules, and who the Ossetians refer to as Batras, and who the Eastern Scythians called Rostam. Rostam is Saxi, Rostam the Scythian born, who becomes the epic hero of the Persian national epic, the Shahnameh. And so this figure in the Amirani myth is the one who comes and frees Amirani by shooting this eagle through with arrows. And this was such a widely disseminated and deeply entrenched element of Scythian folklore that the people in Ossetia to this day still have a tradition of destroying eagles' nests when they find them, as a reverence of, and memorialization of the freeing of Amirani. So clearly there are these elements of the Prometheus myth there. And it also is worth mentioning in that regard that the Parthian dynasty of Iran were descended from Scythians. They adopted the Persian imperial culture and the legacy of the Achaemenid Persians, but they were not Persians. They were descended from Scythians. So they were more nomadic barbarian people who then came and took over the seat of the empire and created the second empire of Iran, the Parthian Empire, which was the great rival of classical Rome.
Right.
And these Parthians had a myth that was so important to them that it was the basis for the iconography on their coins. These Parthians had a myth that Perseus stole fire from the heavens and brought it to mankind and established the order of the Magi in order to be the guardians of the eternal flame on the earth. And according to this myth, Perses, the son of Perseus, was the patriarch of the Persian people. Now, this is interesting because in the iconography of Perseus slaying Medusa, Perseus is looking away from the head of the Gorgon as he severs it. And it's been noted by art historians that the iconography of the bull slaying in Mithraism has this same posture, and you don't find it anywhere else in classical art. Mithras is looking away from the head of the bull as he slits its throat. And in Mithraism, Mithra is portrayed as going to battle against Zorvan, who is basically Kronos, the lord of time. And look, this becomes very significant to the myth of Prometheus. So Mithra overpowers Zorvan, and Zorvan was depicted as a Gorgon. So the Medusa imagery in the myth of Perseus is like a later reiteration of this archaic Mithraic idea of Mithra, namely what becomes later Perseus, slaying the Gorgonic lord of time and appropriating its power in the form of the severed head, right? But looking away from it at the same time. And this same figure steals fire from the heavens, brings it down to earth. His son is the patriarch of the Persians, and he creates the order of the Magi, namely the priests of Zarathustra's religion, to be the guardians of the fire. And there are a lot of elements, of the teaching of Zarathustra, like the use of the term Titan of Wisdom to refer to Ahura Mazda, the main symbol of, the religion being the eternal fire, the main quality of Ahura Mazda being forethought, which is a synonym of Promethea, the root of the name of Prometheus, forethought or thinking ahead or the progressive mentality, the forward-oriented mind.
Right.
And so you can see that there's this older Indo-European, particularly Iranian matrix of the Prometheus myth coming from out of the Caucasus, which is a general region of Zarathustra as well. He was a little bit further to the south in around Lake Urumie in Iranian Azerbaijan, but same general region around the Caspian Sea. And it looks like what happened is this myth fused with the myth of Enki. And how did that happen? Well, the Persian Empire, emanating from out of Persia, from out of like the territory right above the Persian Gulf, took both Mesopotamia, and then, of course, the Iranians were native inhabitants of the Caucasus, so the Persian Empire connected the territory where the Sumerian myths were prevalent with the territory where you had the myth of Amirani in the Caucasus. And these two somehow fused so that by the time Hesiod is living in Anatolia, which again is part of the Persian Empire,
right.
Hesiod was a citizen of Iran. Well, in Hesiod's time, actually, it was slightly before the Persian Empire, but the Medes were already very dominant going into southern Anatolia. And then the Medes and the Persians joined together to create this empire. In any case, the territory where Hesiod winds up basically functioning as this bard and laying this groundwork for Greek folklore, becomes a core part of the Persian Empire. And I think that these two myths fuse there. So what's the other one? The myth of Enki, which is about how there's this conflict between two brothers among the Anunnaki. One of them wants to create mankind as a slave race to serve the various purposes of these gods who came down to earth from the heavens. And this other one, and that's Enlil or Enlil. And he's a storm god, basically Jehovah. And his psychological profile is more or less identical to that of Jehovah in the Old Testament, Yahweh.
I think even El comes from that, right?
El, exactly. Yeah. So
it's El, yeah.
And then, and El, it's interesting. Allah, La illah il Allah, the Muslim, thing. There's no God but El. You could think about. They translate it these days. They love to say there's no God but God, as if it's some universalistic statement, or if it's like abstract monotheistic theology. But really, in a way, you could read that as saying there's no God but El, namely Elil.
And the letter and the Semitic Aleph, whether it's Arabic or Hebrew or whatever, that's the El. That's the letter you use for El. It's not hell, because you use a het for the letter E. So people don't realize that it really is A-L. It's not E-L, but it's pronounced E-L. But
Yes. It's all the evolution of the El cult.
Right.
And this El bastard wanted to create us as a slave race, meant to just, serve the purposes of the Anunnaki.
Well, since we're on this subject, I noticed they try to polemicize this Titan mythology, because they make it look like these are fallen angels that are giving metallurgy and fire to Enoch, and this is in the myth of Enoch, where you have Azazel and Samael and all these different fallen demon angels or whatever they are, and they're falling in love with the women, and they're teaching men how to use fire and teaching them how to use metals, and you're like, wait a minute, are they polemicizing the other myth? And that's probably what's going on.
Absolutely. Now, I was going to wait to get to this, but look, it's just so this, we're in a better flow here. Let me just say it right now, that in the myth of Prometheus, it's said that Prometheus didn't just bring fire, didn't just steal fire from the workshop of Hephaestus on Mount Olympus and bring it as a gift to mankind. Prometheus taught humanity the various arts and sciences. Prometheus, teacher in every art, is how Aeschylus puts it. And so Prometheus, in that Greek version of the myth, is performing exactly the same function. Teacher in every art, brought the fire as a means to mighty ends, Aeschylus says. Mighty ends, like the way Amirani taught humanity how to use this fire to forge weapons, among other things, among other metallurgical, crafts, right? And so Prometheus is doing exactly what the fallen angels were supposedly doing in the Book of Enoch. The Book of Enoch was basically censored from the Old Testament. It survived more or less only in an Ethiopian form, and it explains what the hell happened in Genesis 6, which is an absolutely, it's an absurd part of the Bible, where in like literally one paragraph, you're told that these angels came down and they had sex with, mortal women, and there was this race of giants consequently sired on the earth, and they became rebellious against heaven. And God decides as a result of this to basically wipe out all of mankind in this global deluge. And you're left wondering with this one paragraph, like, what the hell happened here? What could have happened that God has decided to wipe clean his whole creation, right? And by the way, what kind of God is this who didn't see this coming? Right. Anyway, clearly not an omniscient God. Exactly. So it's basically Elil, or as we're going to see, Zeus. Yes. In the myth of Prometheus. And so Prometheus does exactly what the fallen angels supposedly did, which you see in the Book of Enoch. It expands on Genesis 6 at length and talks about how they came down and their purpose was to empower humanity. They weren't just coming down to have sex with mortal women. They were having sex with mortal women to create a race of hybrids on the earth who would be able to contest, the sovereignty of the gods, would be able to lead a essentially liberation struggle against heaven and to storm heaven, as it were. And so they teach humanity all the arts and sciences, exactly what Prometheus did and exactly what Enki is supposed to have done. So Enki is the creator of mankind. Just like in the myth of Prometheus, it's not Zeus who creates humanity. Prometheus is the architect of humanity, the father of mankind. And he's a good father. He's a father who wants his children to flourish, and he beneficently attempts to empower them. He's the kind of father who wants to see his children do even better than him. And so he teaches humanity all these arts and sciences. Just like Enki sends 7 sages to teach humanity all of the various crafts. And, Ellul is furious about this. And, then it lays the groundwork ultimately for this global deluge to basically decimate the high civilization that develops on the basis of the arts and the sciences that were taught to humanity by the rebel Anunnaki, or as the Christians later call them, the fallen angels. And you see all of this in the myth of Prometheus. I mean, so I'm really jumping ahead now, but and we can come back around to it, in a more sequential order. But basically, people lose sight of the fact that the flood myth exists as part of the myth of Prometheus in Greek culture.
Right.
Prometheus's son, Deucalion, is the Greek Noah figure.
Right.
Except that the Greek version makes a hell of a lot more sense.
Right.
Because why would the same God who's trying to wipe out humanity with a flood appoint someone to save humanity from the flood? It doesn't make any sense. Right. This is a Yahwist appropriation of an older myth which was threatening to that religious establishment, a myth wherein it's the son or a representative of the Enki figure, son of Prometheus, who attempts to save what he can of humanity from this global deluge. And so this is Deucalion, and Deucalion is depicted very much in the guise of the sages that worked with Enki as a kind of civilizer. He not only saves a portion of humanity from this flood, he helps to reestablish civilization on the earth. So he's kind of like, you could say, the bricklayer of the Tower of Babel, to put it in biblical terms, the one who, makes another attempt after the flood to build a tower to the heavens to empower and unify humanity. So the myth of Deucalion connects Prometheus to the flood myth in the Bible and underlines the fact that Prometheus is essentially, to put it in biblical terms, the leader of the fallen angels. Figure that later winds up being called Lucifer. And well, what's Lucifer? The bringer of the light. Well, that's the fire that he brought from heaven. It's pretty obvious. And
which is funny because in Lucifer's Roman mythology with Ovid and other writers, there's nothing evil about him. He's a hero. He's a savior god. There's nothing. He's not satanic or whatever the hell the Christians try to say about him later on, or Isaiah tries to say about him in his text. He's just a light bringer. He's the son of dawn.
Yeah. Well, but the thing is, he is satanic in the sense that the word Satan, shaitan, just means ha-shaitan in Hebrew or shaitan in Arabic. Ha-shaitan means the adversary. Sure. And so is he the adversary? Hell yeah, he's the adversary. Prometheus is the original adversary, right? And there's something, now I want to come back to this flood myth, okay? But let me just go on a tangent for a minute, back to the very beginning, right? Because I want to highlight the way in which this character is radically adversarial. Prometheus betrays the Titans. He's an adversary first against his fellow Titans. So he's not a god. Prometheus is a Titan. And he turns on the Titans and sides with Zeus in the Titanomachia, in the clash of the Titans, because Prometheus goes to these fellow Titans. He's like, listen, you can't defeat these Olympians through brute force. I'm telling you, there's got to be strategy here. He lays out stratagems with his forethought, and they won't have it. And so Prometheus takes the position that, well, these Titans are going to lose. This is a loser. It's futile. They're going to lose. And so in order to basically put himself in a better position for achieving a more long-term objective, he shrewdly sides with the Olympians and helps Zeus come to power. Then he realizes in due course that, and let me just point a couple things out before I continue down that road, that when this happens, Prometheus has 3 brothers, and 2 of them wind up being punished by Zeus after he comes to power, after the Olympians win in the Titanomachia. 2 of Prometheus's 3 brothers are punished together with the other Titans, and one of them is a figure called Menoetius. Menoetius was bound in Tartarus under the earth together with the other Titans, and he's the Titan of excessive wrath, prideful rage, and hubris. So you can see how this is a shadow side of Prometheus that later is integrated into the Judeo-Christian image of Satan. It's the side of Prometheus, the brother of Prometheus, as it were, who is bound under the earth. In other words, what becomes later hell in the Judeo-Christian cosmology. He's that side of Prometheus that is bound in the pit of hell, as it were, and has this exceedingly wrathful, prideful, defiance of Zeus from the beginning. And then the other brother of Prometheus, another brother of Prometheus, Atlas, is the strongest of the Titans, and he led the Titans in the battle. He was the general who leads the Titans in the Titanomachia, and he's punished by forcing him to separate heaven and earth through bearing the celestial sphere on his own shoulders, which is an incredibly powerful symbol.
Yeah.
Because it means that he's not just separating heaven and earth, he's connecting heaven and earth. So heaven and earth are connected through Atlas. And remember, Atlas was against Zeus. And so in a way, he's sort of in this dynamic position where he could storm heaven from the earth because he's the one holding up the heavens.
Right.
And then later Atlas becomes a metaphor for all kinds of basically maps of knowledge.
Right. That's good.
Atlases in the sense of star charts, which seafarers use to navigate the oceans. And so then map making, was associated with atlases of the world. And then even in medicine, you have atlases of the human body, basically, there's portrayals of the skeletal system and the nervous system and so on. They're called medical atlases. Right. And so atlas is a term that's very much associated with bodies of knowledge and mapping out the world for the sake of gaining greater knowledge. And so in this way, Atlas is also intimately connected with the meaning of the myth of Prometheus and reflects another aspect of Prometheus's association with science and technology, which is, of course, that the light of the fire that he brings from Olympus, the light of the fire in the dark night of human ignorance, and also the fire of the forge. That's a symbol of technological science. And so it's not incidental that Atlas is the brother of Prometheus. It's emphasizing the association of Prometheus with technological science and humanity's quest for knowledge and mapping out of the world through human initiative and exploration and the quest for discovery. And then the last brother of Prometheus is Epimetheus, who he's the fool, he's the idiot. His name means afterthought. Instead of forethought, Promethea, it comes from Epimethea, which is the opposite adjectival quality, meaning afterthought or hindsight. Like when you look back and say, shit, I shouldn't have done that,
Right,
that's Epimethea. Wow. Hard-earned hindsight and realizing something only in retrospect. So Epimetheus, the other brother of Prometheus, is this forgetful fool, right? Hindsight, we're talking about, how his name means afterthought. And he sides with Prometheus, takes his advice that they should basically help Zeus come to power. And so he's rewarded by being allowed to help Prometheus in the creation of mankind. And in fact, in the creation of the animals in general. So Epimetheus functions as a kind of subcontractor who helps Prometheus as Prometheus is, molding mankind from out of clay. And by the way, just on a side note, this whole issue of man being molded from out of clay, the race of man being molded from out of clay, is significant because in the Semitic tradition that eventually yields Islam,
right,
it's said that before the race of clay, which is Adam, the race of Adam, which is not just a person but a race, Adam is a mankind made of clay. And according to the Semitic myths, before Adam, there was a race made of fire on the earth. And so it appeared, and of course, fire is the element associated with Prometheus. And this race of fire rebelled against the angels, against the Malayek, the angels.
Right.
And against Allah. And they're punished. So it appears, and their civilization is wiped off the face of the earth. So it appears that yet again, there is this parallel from the Greek myth to, some kind of Semitic version where the satanic is associated with the race of fire. And then the race of man, the race of clay, is seen as being subsequent to that. And so the myth of Prometheus is extremely subversive in an Islamic context, because it's suggesting that actually the race of clay wasn't created by Allah, the way it says in the Quran. The race of clay was created by one of these beings of fire who was a rebel against Allah.
Right.
Again, another myth that's been misappropriated by Yahwists, or if we want to put it in Islamic terminology, Muslims.
Right.
Submitters, as the name suggests. So, okay, what we were talking about was the nature of Prometheus as a primordial adversary. So what does this character do, this Epimetheus? He's helping Prometheus create man, and he gives fur to certain animals and claws to other animals to be able to fend for themselves, and he gives sharp teeth to certain other creatures so that they can hunt their food, with their mouths, and basically gives some kind of survival advantage to every creature. But then when it comes to man, Epimetheus forgets to give man any essential quality that would be able to afford him, a survival advantage that would be able to, secure his existence on the earth. And so man is left lacking an essence. This is extremely important. The forgetfulness of Epimetheus, which is the flip side of the Promethea of Prometheus, winds up being responsible for the fact that man lacks an essence. And therefore, Prometheus enlists the aid of Athena, humanity with its soul in the form of a butterfly. So Athena appears in the myth of Prometheus at this point, and there are many images of this. There are reliefs of it. It appears on some seals. It's on some vases and other, Greek pottery. This image of Athena coming in as Prometheus is molding mankind, and there's Epimetheus to the side who forgets to endow man with any essence, and Athena puts a butterfly into the mind. Usually it's into the head of humanity. Now, why Athena? Why does Athena help? Because Prometheus had midwifed Athena into existence. Prometheus, with his axe, had slashed open the skull of Zeus in a kind of, play on a Caesarean section, had split open the close-knit Pykinos mind of Zeus. It's an incredibly important image. Okay, so Zeus is often associated with fate. And so the Pykinos, or close-knit mind of Zeus, is the mesh of fate. And Prometheus slices through it with an axe, which, by the way, is a symbol of cutting through fatalism. And Prometheus delivers Athena from out of the skull of Zeus. And who is she? She's the goddess of wisdom and war.
I was just going to say something.
Yeah, go ahead.
Because in the Gnostic text, you have this understanding of Yahweh thinks he created humans, but really somehow he had a dream where he thought he created Adam, but really it was Sophia, wisdom, that did it. And she looks at him like, you don't even know, I'm the one who did all this. And then but what's even crazier is that the Gnostics, who get called heretics for this, they're pointing to the Bible itself and saying, no, the book of Proverbs says that Sophia was there from the beginning. The Wisdom of Solomon says Sophia created the first father. So like, this is accurate as far as the scriptures say, not just making this stuff up. And then it lines up with what you're saying, Athena being Sophia as well, and then the Titan of Wisdom creating mankind. So even the Yahwists have some of their own sources, right, putting this stuff in there and sort of snitching on themselves.
Absolutely. So that you have the prototype for the Sophianic figure in Athena, who is the goddess of wisdom and war. Why wisdom and war? Because you cannot gain wisdom without going to war. Because Zeus wants us ignorant. The Olympians don't want us to be wise. They are the prototype for what later become the Gnostic archons. And so to seek wisdom is to be prepared to go to war against the gods. That's why Athena is the goddess of wisdom and war, inextricably. Okay? And so this
is also the message of the Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna is telling Arjun, you have to go to war. There's no, you have to make an action right now. You cannot just sit by and let your uncle do his thing. You have to fight your uncle. That's a deep thing right there.
In a Greek context, it winds up being epitomized by Heraclitus in the fragments of Heraclitus, who, by the way, I mean, next to Pythagoras, is the first philosopher in Greek history. Heraclitus says, war is father and king of all. Some men, it shows, or he shows to be slaves. Others, he reveals to be free men. All things come to pass and are ordained in accordance with conflict, right? And so, look, wisdom and war. So why does Athena help Prometheus in this situation where man is left lacking in essence on account of the forgetfulness of Epimetheus? Well, because Prometheus was the midwife of Athena's birth.
Right.
Okay? And so Athena returns the favor by giving man his soul in the form of a butterfly. Now, does this give man an essence? No, not really. And it's another fascinating symbol in this myth, because what's a butterfly? The butterfly is the ultimate symbol of metamorphosis and transformation.
Wow.
So it's underlining the fact that there is no human nature. There's no human nature. Human, quote unquote, nature is to transform, to evolve, to become something else. We are beings of radical becoming. And then what's the other thing that Prometheus has to give man in order to basically give him a chance to fend for himself, because he doesn't have the claws that other animals do, or the large jaws and sharp teeth of other animals, or fur so as not to freeze in the winter. Humanity is gifted fire as a tool of survival. Okay, so fire, which is the fire of the forge, which is the fountainhead of all the crafts and ultimately of technological science, is a remedy for the fact that we are lacking in essence. So what's this myth saying? I mean, why is it that Heidegger and Marx, who don't agree on, all that, I mean, Marx is seen as the intellectual godfather of the left, and Heidegger was literally a Nazi. So, there's some degree of divergence between Marx and Heidegger, but they both said Prometheus was the founder of philosophy, that Prometheus is the, not God, but divinity,
right,
that inaugurates philosophy. Okay,
his name
why?
reflects that too, forethought.
Yeah, but look, it's because why do Marx and Heidegger agree? Because Marx is all about how modern industrial capitalism is going to free humanity. through a revolutionary, dialectic, that modern industrial capitalism is going to be transformed in a way where the power of industry ultimately liberates mankind, and the industry is reappropriated by the workers, and they are no longer alienated from their labor, and they ultimately become sovereign and self-determined. And then Heidegger, the focus of his philosophical project was how the trajectory of science, of abstract rational thought from Plato onward through Descartes, ultimately culminates in modern technological science. And that, we have to find some way to poetically reintegrate the transformative power of modern technological science. So, ultimately, what Heidegger saw in the myth of Prometheus has a lot to do with the fact that fire and the butterfly were the two remedies for mankind being lacking in an essence, in the sense that we, uniquely among all animals, define our own essence. Our existence precedes our essence. And the nature of our existence is to define our own essence through the power of technology. And to be basically the stewards of our own evolution. So we are these butterflies that go through a process of metamorphosis from the caterpillar through the chrysalis, right, to ultimately becoming this creature.
It's kind of like what Nietzsche's getting at with the rope and the Superman thing.
Exactly, exactly. It is the first version of that symbol or metaphor that ultimately becomes Nietzsche's tightrope between ape and overman.
And I also noticed that all of the ancient Greek mysteries, all the great myths, basically, there's usually some sort of metamorphosis involved with the hero, with the savior, with the messiah, whoever it is. They all have some sort of apotheosis, metamorphosis, some sort of resurrection, something like that, which makes it a standard mysteries, I guess you would say, initiation cult or something like that. Yeah, that's the common thread between all of them. You know what I mean?
Sure, I do know what you mean. But the thing is that the Olympian world order is predicated on the stasis of humanity. And so to the extent that there are, hero, by the way, originally it means hybrid. It means hero means, it comes from the word eros, and with reference to the eros or sex between gods and mortals. And so the original heroes were the people who were sired by the quote unquote fallen angels.
Right.
And were more than mere humans, and who actually had a rebellious nature and defied the will of heaven, right? And so to the extent that you have these heroes engaging in developmental trajectories and a building up of their character and persona and developing an ethos and becoming basically men in their own right, you have a defiance of what Olympus wants, which is us to basically remain servile, and submit.
Yeah, that's it.
And not undergo character building, right? Which is going to give us enough psychological and ethical independence to determine our own course in the future. So anyway, you have at the core of this myth of the creation of mankind an emphasis of the fact that our existence precedes our essence, and that through the power of technological science, we are going to undergo various metamorphoses that ultimately hold the potential for us to become as powerful or more powerful than the gods. And so this is, another element of the adversarial character of Prometheus. And then you see this continue in his next act of trickery. So Prometheus is not only a trickster because he steals fire from the workshop of Hephaestus and brings it as a gift to mankind. Prometheus is also a trickster because when Zeus comes around after the creation of humanity, not too happy with how humanity's been created and wanting to reduce humanity to servility, Zeus says to Prometheus, well, now that you created these things, which, I'm not very happy with, how you did this. I don't know about this butterfly business, right? I want you to decide how they're going to sacrifice to me, right? How are these creatures going to be brought to their knees and, basically worship and revere me? And so Prometheus devises this machination where he presents Zeus with two forms of sacrifice and asks him to choose between them. And in one of them, he's basically taken all of the nourishing lean meat from an animal, from a sacrificed animal, and stuffed it into the stomach of an ox, which is very visually displeasing. And in the other bowl is the bones, the white bones of the sacrificed animal, but covered with a veneer of marbled fat. And Zeus picks the marbled fat, not realizing that it's all bones underneath. And this means that man gets to keep the nourishing part of the sacrificed animal and is basically giving nothing of importance to Olympus. So this is another way in which we see that Prometheus does not want his children to be, a servile race revering some gods above themselves. Prometheus is trying to, basically ensure that the nourishing part of the sacrifice remains the allotment of human beings.
Right.
And this is another act of trickery that he engages in, which, by the way, portrays Zeus as a fool. Because, what kind of God, you don't realize, like, he's pulling a fast one on you like this. And Hesiod tries to cover this up. Hesiod, when he writes the Theogony, in particular, he mentions the myth of Prometheus in both of his major works, in Works and Days,
right,
and in Theogony. And it's interesting that when you read Works and Days, Prometheus has a little bit more autonomy, and his defiance of Zeus is a little bolder. Mm-hmm. But then when he writes Theogony, Hesiod is really trying to come up with a canon of Olympian religion. Right? This Hesiod character is an epitome of Greek traditionalism,
absolutely,
patriarchy, conservatism, misogyny. He hates women, okay? And so when he writes Theogony, he says absurd things like, oh, well, Zeus knew that Prometheus was trying to pull a fast one on him, and he just, picked the bowl of bones covered with the fat to, like, lure Prometheus into committing some sin of defiance or something. Right. He's making justifications to whitewash the vulnerabilities of Zeus because he's helping to build a cult of total obedience to Olympus. But then later, you have Aeschylus about 50, 60 years later or something, somewhere around there, the next century. Hesiod is in the 600s BC. Aeschylus is in the 500s BC. By the time Aeschylus turns Prometheus into the first figure of Greek tragedy, you see the more humanist and rebellious elements of the myth being, basically restored to what was probably their original form.
And I noticed in this particular version with Aeschylus, Aeschylus is very fascinating because I know he's initiated in all these mysteries. He gets in trouble. He almost gets killed for spilling the beans of what these mysteries are. Well, anyways, before we even get to that, I noticed that in that text, he really has this long dialogue between Hermes, who's sort of a tempter. He's the mouth word. He's the logos of Zeus. He's the word. He's the messenger of Zeus, basically. Zeus won't see him. He's like, why can't Zeus come himself? And I noticed that Prometheus is like antagonizing him, and Hermes is tempting him. Oh, we'll let you go. Just bend the knee. Just bend the knee. And Prometheus refuses to cave into the tempter. What is this about?
He's the Angel Gabriel.
Ooh, that's awesome.
Hermes is who later becomes Jibrail, or the Angel Gabriel, who
that makes a lot of sense.
Brings the Quran to Muhammad, and so on and so forth. And so this messenger of God, the announcer, comes and basically, or Thoth, comes and basically, he tries to, okay, he's not just tempting Prometheus, he's trying to torture a secret from out of him, because when Prometheus is bound by Zeus, it's not just a punishment, it is a torture that's intended to break Prometheus so that he reveals the secret of who is going to overthrow Zeus. Prometheus, with his forethought, and by the way, the mother of Prometheus is Themis, not to be confused with Thetis, who we're going to talk about momentarily.
Yeah.
But Themis, the Titaness, is the mother of Prometheus, and she was the creator of the Oracle of Delphi, which she later gives to Apollo. So the prophetic power that's associated with the Oracle of Delphi is also somehow implicit in the myth of Prometheus, because Themis, the creator of the Oracle of Delphi, is the mother of Prometheus. So anyway, Prometheus, with his prophetic power and his forethought, the kind of forethought and projection that also becomes instrumental to technological science, right? Technological science is all about projection. And so Prometheus, with his power of projection, his forethought, and his prophecy, knows who is going to eventually overthrow Zeus. And it turns out that it is the soul who later winds up being born as Achilles. And what Prometheus knows is that Zeus is going to rape Themis. Zeus is a serial rapist. He just turns into all these various animals and goes down and basically rapes these women, these poor women. And Prometheus knows that one of these women is going to be Themis, and so Achilles is going to be born as a proper hero, a hero in the old sense of a hybrid. He's going to be a demigod. And this demigod version of Achilles is going to lead humanity into rebellion and overthrow Zeus and be a new sovereign over humanity, a much more beneficent, much more humanitarian ruler from the throne of Olympus. And later what winds up happening is that actually Zeus finds out that this is going to happen. And so Zeus basically pulls back and lets Themis be married to Peleus, who becomes the human mortal father of Achilles. And then we have the whole story of Achilles and the Iliad, right? But this Achilles was supposed to be born as a demigod, and Prometheus knows this, and he wants to torture this out of, Zeus wants to torture this out of Prometheus, and so he keeps sending Hermes. He keeps sending Hermes to try to, convince Prometheus to give up this secret. While we're on this, though, let me point out why is it significant that it's Achilles? And by the way, I discussed this at length in Prometheus and Atlas. This is, the devil's really in the details here, and I go into the Iliad and its connection to this part of the myth of Prometheus in my chapter on Prometheus in Prometheus and Atlas. If you look at the character of Achilles in the Iliad, his conflict with Agamemnon and the defiant stance that he takes amidst the Trojan War shows you the first figure in Greek literature who is questioning the social order. In archaic Greece, there was no conceptual distinction between social order and nature. Nature was framed as a concept by the early philosophers who are writing about 150 years at least after the Iliad, at least. In the time of the Iliad, in the time of quote unquote Homer, whether there was actually a Homer who wrote this or whether he was a bard who later recited it, whatever. In the time of quote unquote Homer, there was no conceptual distinction yet between nature and the nature of things in society. It was believed that customs were God-given the way that, the seasons are God-given, the way that the habits of animals are God-given. Social institutions are just the way things are, and they can't be questioned any more than, the way the birds and the bees live are, right? It's all just the way things inevitably have to be.
Right.
And so when you see Achilles in the Iliad basically call bullshit on Agamemnon and confront him as an unjust, tyrannical ruler and a bad commander, and stand up for himself pridefully, some would say with hubris, the kind of hubris that we see from Prometheus, ultimately.
Right.
You are seeing the first questioning of the social order and an implicit framing of the concept of justice.
Wow.
As opposed to the way things just are. So Achilles is saying, sorry, fuck that. Things shouldn't be this way. They should be some other way.
Right.
And this is the kernel of the idea of utopia right here in the figure of Achilles. So what's being said in the myth of Prometheus, where Prometheus knows that it's Achilles who's going to overthrow Zeus if he's allowed to be born as a demigod, is that there's a connection being made back to the story of the Iliad and to the first framing of a just order as opposed to the de facto order of the world. The first aspiration for utopia. That is also part and parcel of this part of the Prometheus myth.
It's the birth of progressivism. And I just thought of something. There's an epigram in the 1st century, I think during the time of Vespasian or Domitian or something like that. Martial was the author. And he says that he has a quick little hymn or epigram, I guess they're called, where he says, Prometheus, just as Prometheus is bound to the Scythian cliff, nourished the constant bird with the glut of his stomach, so did Laurelus, hanging from a cross that was no stage prop, offered up his uncovered trails to the Caledonian bear. And I noticed that there's this, because this is somebody who's inspired by the Epicureans and the naturalists and the Stoics, and he's looking at Prometheus as an example, this great example of sacrificing yourself for the good, for the progress of the world. And and that brings us to like Christianity. Are they trying to do something similar to this with Jesus? I think so.
Yes, although it's a perversion of it, and we'll come to that. But, and notice also in this quote, the Scythian peaks.
Right.
So yet again, the Greeks knew that the place where Prometheus was bound was Scythian territory. And this connects again back to the myth of Amirani and how, there's an awareness here that somehow this Prometheus myth has Scythian origins.
Right.
At least one of its vectors is Scythian, and the other one is the myth of Enki, and probably were fused in the Persian Empire. So speaking of the Persian Empire, we're talking about Aeschylus, and Aeschylus, he's famous as a poetic playwright and really as the founder of drama in its current form. Before Aeschylus, there was only a single bard reciting a poem on a stage. And it's Aeschylus who introduced other characters and created a drama where there's multiple perspectives, right? And this is not where I was about to go, but, again, we need to pause and just reflect on this for a minute.
Yeah.
That just contemplate what a transformation of human consciousness that is. And again, this is something I go into at length in Prometheus and Atlas. Before Aeschylus, you had a bard who was basically reciting an ancestral tradition, and you only had that bard's perspective. And moreover, the bard did not insert himself into the poem so as to, interject any commentary on it, right? You're just having a person acting as a medium for the transmission of ancestral tradition. Aeschylus invents this thing, which we call drama in retrospect, where there's multiple characters and they each have their own perspective. So think about this. What effect does this have on people's consciousness, where they're watching a stage play where for the first time they're getting multiple characters with different, divergent perspectives, each of which the audience member could choose to identify with and to flip between these divergent perspectives. And moreover, the setting for this drama with multiple characters in it is an amphitheater where literally there's multiple perspectives on the drama, right? Depending on where you're sitting in the amphitheater on any given night, you know, during the many times that you go to see a stage play, you will have one or another varying perspective on the drama. So there's the perspectival shift between the various characters, and then the perspectival shift in terms of geometry, perceptual geometry of the audience member sitting in an amphitheater. And lo and behold, this is the moment when we go from really stiff Egyptian-style sculptures in Greece to photorealistic three-dimensional sculptures in Greece, okay, with that extremely, true-to-life, high precision that classical Greek sculptures are famous for.
Right.
You think that just happened by accident? No, it happened because you had sculptors who were sitting there in amphitheaters watching stage plays from varying perspectives on different evenings, and they discovered perspective, both geometric perspective and also psychological perspective, by flipping between the viewpoints of different characters in a drama. Aeschylus is responsible for this. And which is the first of the dramas that Aeschylus composed? Who is the first figure of tragedy? Prometheus.
Right.
So you see, this is also bound up into the myth of Prometheus, this elevation, mutation of human consciousness that becomes so defining of classical Greek culture, and in particular its excellence in the arts. And then, by extension, geometry as well, which becomes, the cornerstone for all of the sciences, right? I mean, let no one who hasn't studied geometry enter here. It was a statement over the doorway to Plato's Academy. And by the way, in Plato's Academy, since I mentioned that, in Plato's Academy, there was a altar to Prometheus.
Wow.
There was a burning fire on an altar in Plato's Academy. And there was a tradition of lighting torches in this fire altar and running them down into the city of Athens from there. Wow. And in fact, Plato opens his Republic, which is probably his most Promethean text. Plato opens Republic with the image of this torch race, this torch-bearing relay. The torch-bearing relay race is the opening of Plato's Republic. And, this became then the basis for the lighting of the torch and the passing of the torch in the Olympic Games, which probably shouldn't be called the Olympic Games. It should be called the Promethean Games. Anyway, to go back to Aeschylus, because how did we get here? We got here, I was talking about the Persian Empire.
Right. Well, I was actually going to jump in real quick before we get back to him. There's an author named, he's actually pretty famous, Eratosthenes. He's Eratosthenes, sorry, of Cyrene. And he's one of the greatest scientists of the age. And he has a story of Alexander the Great being in a cave near the Caucasus, where he identifies that the demigod Prometheus was here being imprisoned. And so Alexander the Great was like, this is a sacred place. Everybody stop what you're doing. Let's offer sacrifice to Prometheus right here, right now. And then Arian of Nicomedia also has the same story in his books too. So it just shows you how these elites love this god. He's in another category. He's special.
Let me just comment on that before we go back to the thread about Aeschylus, because you said certain elites, whatever.
Yeah.
Well, one can say many things about the Rockefellers, but one thing that David Rockefeller did that was quite impressive was erect the statue of Prometheus in Rockefeller Center, and which I tend to think of as the hearth fire of New York City, and basically the sacred center of what is still hanging on as the cosmopolitan capital of the planet. And when you look at the statue of Prometheus at Rockefeller Center, it's Prometheus emerging from a rock, soaring through the celestial equator, crossing the plane of the zodiac. So it's the ecliptic and the zodiac and Prometheus is soaring through that, emerging from out of a rock. Well, the crossing of the celestial equator and the zodiac, plane of the zodiac, is the main symbol of Mithraism, because Mithra grabs hold of the wheelwork of the heavens and shifts, the sphere of the heavens, creating the precession of the equinoxes as he overpowers Zorvan or Kronos. Again, like Prometheus siding with Zeus to overthrow Kronos, right? And then in the myths of Mithras, there are two versions of the myth of the birth of Mithras. One of them is that he was born of a virgin, but that's the less popular version that then, influenced Christianity. The more popular version was that Mithra was born of a rock. He was born from out of a rock.
Yeah.
And moreover, in Mithraism, there is this stage of initiation, penultimate stage of initiation, heliodromos, where the stage of the solar charioteer, where the solar charioteer goes up there into the heavens and sets the world on fire, throws fire down. That phrase from Jesus in the Gospels, I have come to cast fire upon the earth, right? And so that's taken from this grade of initiation in Mithraism, where there's a casting of fire down upon the earth from heaven. And
yeah, in the Greek, it's fire from Aranos, and then Elijah also says that too. And it's funny because Aranos is translated as heaven, but he's also a god, the sky god, the heavens god, and he's the father of isn't he like the grandfather of the Titans or something like that?
Yes.
So that's
right. And so Prometheus's grandfather,
right?
Grandfather Prometheus, who together with Gaia sired the Titans. And so in the statue at Rockefeller Center, you see this flame in the hand of Prometheus. But here's the thing, Prometheus, he's soaring up from the rock. So he's born out of the rock like Mithra. He's soaring up over the crossing of the ecliptic and the plane of the zodiac like Mithra. And he's in the heavens now, and he's holding this flame. And he's not holding a torch bringing the fire to mankind, although obviously that's implied. It's Prometheus, right?
Yeah.
Holding this flame in his hand, almost as if he's about to cast it down onto the earth. So yet again, it's a reference to the myth of Mithra, particularly the grade of Heliodromos, or the solar charioteer, which is an image of a future fiery apocalypse of the earth that comes from out of ancient Iranian religion. And so you were mentioning, how did I get here? The elites and Prometheus. Whoever designed that statue, I mean, manship is credited with that statue, but who told him to design it that way? And, what role did David Rockefeller have, or people around him? Whatever they were thinking, they knew that Prometheus is Mithra. They're the same figure.
I can see that too.
This is an esoteric truth that's known by certain occult elites throughout history, that Prometheus, the Titan, is the Titan Mithra. And Mithra in the Indo-European religions, you always have this division between the gods and the Titans. It exists in every form of Indo-European religion. Right. And in the Indo-Iranian branch, there is, like in the Greek branch, this division between the Ahuras or Ashuras and the Devas, the Titans and the gods. And Mithra is the most important of the Titans.
Right.
So at war with Indra, who is this kind of thunderbolt-wielding Zeus-like figure among the pantheon of the gods, among the Devas.
Yep.
So, okay, you have that. But where were we? We were talking about Aeschylus, and I just wanted to also mention the fact that Aeschylus served in the Persian Wars, and one of the other plays that he's famous for is the play The Persians. He wrote a play, The Persians, and we were just talking about the invention of perspective by Aeschylus in the context of his crafting of the art form of tragedy, tragic drama. And it's interesting that in the Persians, Aeschylus is able to take the perspective of the Persians. The Persians doesn't trash the Persians. It's a relatively sympathetic portrayal of the Persians, including of Xerxes as a kind of tragic figure
Mhm.
who, yeah, he suffers from hubris, but so does Prometheus. And Prometheus is the hero of the Prometheus trilogy, which we only have Prometheus Bound left. But originally it was Prometheus the Firebringer, Prometheus Bound, and then Prometheus Unbound.
It's like Dark Knight, the trilogy. You have Dark Knight, and then he rises, and then yeah.
Exactly. And Prometheus Unbound was supposed to be the part where Hercules comes and frees him, right? And so on, kills the eagle and all that. And so this was this great trilogy. It was the first proper drama of the Western world. And Prometheus was the first tragic hero of the Western world. And so when he writes the Persians, and he depicts Xerxes as this kind of tragic figure who suffers from his hubris, suffers a downfall on account of his hubris, he's in a way almost empathizing with the enemy that he fought against on the battlefield as a soldier in the Persian Wars. He got into the mind of the enemy, and he was able to write this drama, which, you know, portrays the Persians as something other than a cardboard cutout.
Right.
And that's also quite fascinating. And I don't think it's incidental at all that Prometheus gets valorized as a heroic figure, as a not just creator, but champion and benefactor of mankind against the tyrannical and unjust God at just the time when the Persian Empire takes over a large part of Greece. Aeschylus is living in a Persian-dominated Greece. Yes, the Athenians are still resisting, but most of Greece is under Persian rule at this time. And the cities where philosophy is getting off the ground are all Persian-ruled cities.
Right.
And so, you know, not only does the Prometheus myth have an Indo-European kernel in the myth of Amirani, there's a reevaluation of Prometheus in Greek culture, where he goes from being this, the story of Prometheus goes from being this, how can I put it, warning against defying the gods, a kind of morality tale that is meant to emphasize the power of Zeus, which is what you get in Hesiod, in the earliest presentation of Prometheus, to the Prometheus of Aeschylus, who is a tragic hero. What's responsible for that almost moral inversion that takes place, that what Nietzsche would call reevaluation of values? What's responsible for that? Well, the Persian colonization of Greece. Because from the Persian, Zoroastrian, or Mithraic perspective, Zeus is Ahriman, and Prometheus is Ahura Mazda and or Mithra. And so you can see reflected in the reevaluation of Prometheus as a hero, a Greek assimilation of Persian ideas, which then becomes fundamental for the whole developmental trajectory of the Western world. You know, the developmental trajectory that Oswald Spangler winds up calling Faustian. Spangler calls the West Faustian on the basis of Goethe's Faust, Goethe's popularization of this alchemist, medieval alchemist who makes a deal with the devil and so on and so forth, right? And basically, usurps godly powers. But in fact, Goethe, the author of Faust, admitted that in the dark night of his soul, at the time in his life where he felt most alone and alienated and aggrieved, he looked to Prometheus as his personal savior.
Wow.
Goethe wrote attempted to write a drama on Prometheus, and he has a poem that survived, a fragmentary poem about Prometheus. And so Goethe, who's, in hindsight, through Spangler, responsible for coining the term the Faustian world to refer to the West, Goethe actually admitted that Prometheus was his god.
Wow. That's what I wanted to get to in a second. But before I get to, I was going to ask you, what's Prometheus, the state of Prometheus right now? What's his fate? Does he die? Is he ruin the world right now? What are your thoughts on that? But I also want to get into how this trickles down into Gnostic theology. Which one do you think is, which one should we tackle first?
Well, they're deeply interrelated. Okay, because let me try to condense a rather complex and large scale observation into something as concise as possible. And that's that just from, the elements that we've already looked at in the myth of Prometheus, you can see how this is a prototype for a lot of Gnostic mythology and for the idea of the Gnostic savior,
right,
and for rebellion against the archons and so on and so forth.
And you have the imagery of the serpent coiled around the tree as evil, whereas in this polemicized, what do you satanic, I guess, because it's opposing it. This is the symbol of wisdom and knowledge, and for some reason one's bad, one's evil, and it's like they're at odds here. So yeah.
Yes, and so very long story short, and if you want to see my more in-depth analysis of this, in Prometheusm, I get into this in greater detail. And also, believe it or not, in my book, Closer Encounters, I wrote a book on the UFO phenomenon called Closer Encounters. And it's a bit of a tome. It's a comprehensive analysis of the entire close encounter phenomenon. And in chapter 6, in the penultimate chapter of that book, I get into Christianity in depth and detail and the genesis of the Christ mythos, okay? And how it is a form of social engineering by means of cognitive dissonance. So in the Christ mythos, you have on the one hand, Jesus in the Gospels very clearly saying that Jehovah is his father, that he's there to represent Yahweh. Yahweh is his father. And in fact, not a dot of an I or a cross of a T from the Tanakh, the Old Testament, will pass out of existence or out of relevance until the end of the world. And so Jesus, speaking through one side of his mouth, affirms all the legalism of the Old Testament and takes pride in being the son of this genocidal, tyrannical maniac, sadist, who is responsible for Moses' slaughter of these poor golden calf worshiping, dancing Israelites in the Sinai desert, who's responsible for the genocide at Jericho, who's responsible for like just all the most horrendous, brutally inhuman acts you can imagine that are chronicled throughout the Old Testament. And of course, for all the wonderful laws in Leviticus and Deuteronomy, right? I mean, the most like despicably inhuman legal code, right, and basically structure of theocratic authority that we've seen in human history. And so Jesus, on the one hand, is coming to validate all of that. And when you look at Jesus from that perspective, through those particular verses in the Gospels, then the only problem, sure, he says to the Jews, you're disinherited. The kingdom doesn't belong to you anymore. It belongs to humanity. It belongs to anyone who follows my Father, right? Right. Well, from that perspective, his only problem with the Jews is the same problem that Yahweh had with the Jews throughout the whole Old Testament, where Yahweh keeps telling these Jews, you rebellious people never learn a lesson. He says they're a uniquely rebellious people, right? Because they keep disobeying somehow.
Calls them stiff-necked people, yep.
Stiff-necked Israelites. They keep setting up idols of various kinds. They're worshiping Ishtar and Baal and this one and that one, okay? And so Jesus's problem with the Jews is just that. It's that, look, Yahweh's had enough with your stiff-necked rebelliousness, and so you're disinherited. You're not the chosen people anymore, and the kingdom belongs to anybody who submits to Yahweh through me. So that's one Jesus, and that's the Jesus that, for all the differences between Catholicism, Eastern Orthodoxy, and Protestantism, including the evangelical churches in the United States, for all the various doctrinal differences between these warring sects of Christianity, all of them accept that version of Jesus in one way or another. Right. That's the institutional Jesus. And then you have this Gnostic Jesus. Yep. And what is this Gnostic? And there are verses in the Gospels that support that too, that parallel verses in the Gnostic Gospels. And what the Gospels that were rejected at Nicaea, right? And what does this Jesus tell you? Well, this Jesus tells you, that, the law, you don't need to follow the law as long as, you
circumcised in the heart.
Yeah. It's about the spirit and not the law. And the world is a fallen material creation anyway. And Jesus is here to free you from the world because just like him, you're not of the world. And the world was created by these inferior archons and not by the true God. And he's the way to find the true God and so on and so forth. Yeah. But here's the thing. The Gnostic version of Christianity is pacifist.
Yeah.
The Gnostic Jesus is a radical pacifist who rejects political rebellion. To the extent that you embrace the legalistic Jesus that affirms Yahweh in the Old Testament, maybe you could see that Jesus as a kind of political rebel.
Right.
But if you go in the Gnostic direction, then you're really emphasizing the pacifistic passages in the Gospels. And so Gnosticism, Christian Gnosticism, is a doctrine of pacifism. Why? Because this is a fallen world governed by archons. And to the extent that you participate in political power, you are being corrupted by archons. Power is inherently corrupting,
Right.
from a Gnostic perspective. And if you ask me, and I've laid this argument out at length in my various writings, like I just said, this is cognitive dissonance. This is a doctrine directed to demoralize and degenerate society. Because first of all, you're left in an intellectual contradiction.
Yeah.
You're left in an intellectual contradiction. Do I follow the Old Testament? Don't I follow the Old Testament? This Jesus keeps contradicting himself, which then it screws with your head. It's cognitive dissonance. You're made to believe, you're made to take on faith two things that are contradictory, to believe them at the same time.
Yeah.
And what does that do? It puts you in a mental state where you're suffering extreme tension. And in order to resolve that tension, you will latch on to anything as a life raft. It's a psychological tactic.
It becomes a buffet of ideas that you can just pick and choose from. You know what? Real quick, I just want to jump in real quick, because one of the oldest monasteries that was abandoned when Islam took over the Byzantine Eastern Empire, right next to where they thought Mount Sinai was, which is, I don't know if it really is or not, but anyways, there was a monastery there, and there's one of the oldest depictions of Jesus in the world that they found in this place. And they figured out that if you mirror one side of Jesus's face, you get a perfect image. And if you mirror the other side, you get a perfect image. They're imposing two different faces on Jesus's face to show his dual nature. So the early Christians knew what you're saying right now. This wasn't a secret. This whole idea of putting a Bible in one spot, making a canon, wasn't even a thing. Marcion had his own gospel. He picked and chose what Jesus he wanted to have in his own Bible. The Gnostics had their own Jesus. The other guys had their own Jesus. It wasn't until later that they put it all in one spot, and that's how you get this weird schizophrenic message.
Yeah.
But to add.
But here's my point, Neil, is that regardless of which Jesus you go for,
right,
neither the institutional legalistic Jesus, who is the Son of Yahweh, nor the antinomian Gnostic Savior is a figure who inspires active rebellion against unjust divinities, let's say, not to call them gods, right? The beings that become God and the angels for the Christians, and used to be Zeus and the Olympians for the Greeks, right? Neither image of Jesus inspires active, meaning political rebellion against the unjust rule of heaven. So Gnosticism is inherently disempowering. Christian Gnosticism is debilitating because of its pacifism,
right,
because of the association of power inherently with the archons. Whereas in the myth of Prometheus, you see a prototype for all of the most positive elements of Gnosticism, but you see them in a context which totally rejects pacifism and calls for a militant resistance against the unjust tyranny of heaven over the earth.
Sure.
And a demand for the self-determination of mankind. So in that sense, Prometheism, a kind of theism based on Prometheus, the spirituality that's implicit in the myth of Prometheus, is proto-Gnostic, but it's satanic. And this brings me to the other aspect of your question about, where is Prometheus today? What happened with Prometheus later? And so we see a reappropriation of the myth of Prometheus at the dawn of the modern age, where you have romantic poets. I mentioned Goethe earlier, also Lord Byron, who writes a poem about Prometheus. And then most famously, Byron's best friend, Percy Shelley, who writes Prometheus Unbound, which is a 4-act play about, the whole mythos of Prometheus, including the parts of the story that were lost in the version of Aeschylus about Prometheus ultimately being freed from his chains and so on and so forth. And one really interesting thing about the Prometheus Unbound play written by Percy Shelley around 1820 is that he uses all Latin names for the characters. Like he uses Jupiter instead of Zeus, or Mercury instead of Hermes, but not for Prometheus. And what would Prometheus be in Latin? Lucifer. And he makes it abundantly clear, Shelley does, that the flood, the flood that Deucalion helps save some portion of mankind from, is the flood of Noah. And that the civilization that was destroyed by Yahweh was Atlantis, is the Greek Atlantis. The ruins of Atlantis at the bottom of the ocean feature in Shelley's Prometheus Unbound play. And so Shelley underlines the fact that Prometheus is deeply connected to Atlantis. It's not accidental that, or incidental that, the king of Atlantis is named Atlas. So Atlantis means the realm of Atlas. That's where the name Atlantis comes from. It means the realm of Atlas because Poseidea was ruled by a king called Atlas. In fact, the kings were all called Atlas. And so I'm guessing this was a title, not a proper name of a person. And the person who was the sovereign of Atlantis was given this title in reference to the brother of Prometheus, namely the Titan Atlas, who leads the Titans in war against the gods. He's the general of the Titan army in the Titanomachia.
Wow.
And what do the Atlanteans do? The core of the myth of Atlantis that Plato recounts for us in Timaeus and Critias is that the Atlanteans lead a war against Olympus. They attempt to unify the whole earth under their naval rule, and they're no longer worshiping the gods. They've become totally irreverent toward the Olympians. And this is why when they're on the brink of unifying the whole earth, Zeus decides to wipe them off the face of the planet with this deluge. So Shelley in Prometheus Unbound depicts the destruction of Atlantis, and he makes it quite clear that this is a parallel to the biblical flood story. And he's associating Prometheus with the rebel angels, with the fallen angels who were punished by Yahweh. And so, point being, in the modern era, you see authors like Goethe, Lord Byron, and Percy Shelley explicitly appropriate the myth of Prometheus as a positive image of Satan. Right? I mean, people often talk about Satan as an entirely negative figure that cannot be, dissociated from Christianity, that's predicated on Christianity, that's parasitic on Christianity. But folks, there's a Satan before Satan, and that's Prometheus. And, one place that this becomes abundantly clear is in the modern Prometheus, right? You ask about, where is Prometheus today? Where is Prometheus in the modern age? Well, look, the alternate title for Frankenstein, the subtitle of the book, is The Modern Prometheus. So Percy's wife, Mary Shelley, pens this tale in which we have an extremely Luciferian depiction of Dr. Frankenstein as the modern Prometheus. And I think
we're on the verge of a new world with AI and virtual reality and all this cutting edge technology that's really going to change everything. Like, we're right on the border of what's about to happen.
Yes, and Frankenstein was the first of these great sci-fi stories that involved transhuman technologies, and you can see the debt to Frankenstein or the modern Prometheus throughout the history of modern science fiction, up to and including Ridley Scott's Prometheus. Ridley Scott's film in 2012, Prometheus, the prequel to the Alien saga, is very much a retelling of Frankenstein in a cosmic context. So the myth of Prometheus, I would say, is very much alive.
Yeah. Well, especially if you combine him with Mithra, because we live in a legalistic age everything we do is all, sign this document, make sure that everything's lawful. Like, no, but you have like banking systems, and we have systems in place, PayPal. It's all mediators and signing on the dotted line and technology. It really is, in a spiritual sense, whether however you want to interpret this, it's a world ruled by Prometheus - Mithra.
Yeah, and the point is to take back this technology, to reintegrate these capacities that we were gifted with by Prometheus for the sake of fostering human flourishing, rather than allowing ourselves to be dehumanized by this technology, right? Prometheus brought the gift of techne to man so that we could determine our own destiny, not so that we could wind up being instrumentalized into something like the Borg, not so that AI could ensconce us in such a fashion as to divest us of our humanity and leave us with a hive mind. So right now we are at the 11th hour. We're at a key turning point in the face of the technological singularity, where we have to basically retrieve the poetic power of the Prometheus myth and to understand technological science in the right way as a tool to empower our evolution, so that we can transform, like that caterpillar in the chrysalis, into the butterfly that appears at the creation of humanity in the myth of Prometheus. And so I would say that, Prometheus is a figure that represents the promise of technological science. But there's also this shadow side, this Frankensteinian danger that we face, right? Approaching this technological singularity within this very century. And so it's more important than ever right now to positively reappropriate this myth and understand the power that it already has over us unconsciously. We need to take that unconscious power, that daimonic power of the Prometheus archetype over our society, and transform it into something that's more self-conscious and that can be directed in a positive manner as a force of liberation and enlightenment.
Yeah, and do you think, in the context of like, I don't know, maybe climate change, for example, like if there's some sort of threat of some disaster on Earth, Prometheus being the archetype of this, the only thing that can save us is, we have to figure out a way through technology to get ourselves right. Maybe, I don't know, go off into space or something. I don't even know what that is, but that also represents this sort of butterfly effect of like a metamorphosis of the human of humanity. Like, we need to change something, or else if we keep going down this path, it's done. We're done. We're going to be wiped out, right?
Absolutely, that's right. But we also need to remember that, retreat, Ludditism, and retreat back to nature and to pre-industrial society and all this crap that's being promoted by a lot of elites today, right? The eco-friendly lifestyle. No. We can use technology to save the ecosystem. But the other thing we have to remember is that Prometheus didn't just give us the fire of the forge. The fire that he gifted mankind with is also the fountainhead of all of the arts and crafts. In other words, literature, painting, right? Drama, as per Aeschylus. So there is a unity of science and art that, is at the core of the myth of Prometheus. And we need to cultivate that aesthetic sensibility so that we use technology in ways that are poetic, in ways that are not alienating and instrumentalizing, but that are part of the expansion of the creative capacity of humanity. Because Prometheus is also the deity of the arts, of literature, of poetry. And that's something that we shouldn't lose sight of, right? As we enter this crucible of the technological singularity, we are going to need to be more artful than ever before, so that we use technology as a tool for liberation and empowerment, rather than allowing it to be an instrument of dehumanization.
Yeah, and I think the idea of becoming like gods by copying what's in nature onto technology, we can create systems of travel or whatever that is just beyond our even capacity to even think about how great we can be right now, you know?
As Shelley says, and this is a good note to end on, as Shelley says in Prometheus Unbound, we can come up with arts as of yet undreamed of, arts that haven't even been conceived by the mind of the gods.
Wow.
Right? And so it's not a question of copying nature, it's a question of bettering nature. We can do better than nature.
Ooh.
We can do better than the gods. We can improve upon nature. And so therefore, you see that from a Christian perspective, right, even including a Gnostic Christian perspective, because the Gnostic doesn't want to improve this world, the Gnostic wants to escape this world.
Escape the world.
From a Christian perspective, Gnostic or otherwise, this is satanic.
Yep. Yeah.
The idea that we can do better than the gods, we can best God or nature, that is the core of the Prometheus myth.
It's eating the fruit of knowledge, literally. It's accepting, and by the way, it's also reflected in Persephone eating the pomegranate. It's like a mirror of that. But speaking of taking the fruit of knowledge, you have just attained true gnosis. And by the way, check out Reza Jorjani's books on Amazon. Links are in the description.
You have just attained true gnosis. The demiurge has no power over you.